Coming to you from Sunway University, this is Sun for You Radio.
Hello, welcome to Sun for You Radio. Today I am the host for today. It's Jet. I'm from Sunway Film Society, where people on campus get to experience and enjoy film and filmmaking as a form of media. And so with me today we have Dr Rama, which is a lecturer at the Department of Film and Theatre in Sunway. And today we have a special guest.
Dr Adil Johan, you are currently lecturing at the University of Malaya.
Yes.
Which faculty?
So I'm a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Creative Arts within the music department at Universiti Malaya, but I'm also, it's a bit complex because I'm holding a post as a Deputy Executive Director at the Asia Europe Institute within Universiti Malaya as well. I'm a musician first and foremost. I started playing the saxophone at 14 years old. I grew up in Penang. I learned from going to school band in St Xavier's Institution. Fast forward, when I had the opportunity to do my bachelor's degree in Toronto, Canada, and I did jazz performance there for about 4 years, got my degree, decided to study audio engineering as well for another stint for like a year and a half. Came back to Malaysia, got my first job as a music lecturer in UCSI University, where I got to teach in the contemporary music program, the bachelor's degree program. But that was a very formative time for me in Malaysia in 2007. I was very much deep in the Kuala Lumpur jazz scene, and I was exposed to a lot of different artists, and I played a lot at this venue called No Black Tie. But aside from jazz, I also performed with singer-songwriters like Isaac Entry, as well as the late great Dr Wan Zawawi, who's also a close family friend. And of course, that was when I met Azmail Yuno, who's actually an undercover lecturer here at Sunway University. Long story short, working with a bachelor's degree in Malaysia in 2007 was, I mean, you can't make ends meet. I mean, it just wasn't like I needed to make the money. So the one thing that you do is you continue your education, and I had the opportunity and privilege to study my master's in music in Australia, in University of New South Wales, a master's in music. But while I was there, while I was hoping to develop my skills as a jazz saxophonist, I was exposed to the study of ethnomusicology, which is the study of the culture of music and the social and even the political context of music of the world's people. I was so taken by it that I decided, instead of doing a performance final project in my second semester, I decided to do something equivalent to an honours essay, which was a research essay. And that got me interested in my musical roots as a Malaysian, per se. I was very much trained in North American, African American music when I studied jazz in Canada. And I was listening to music from the West. I grew up listening to songs in English, mostly in an English-speaking household. But then I realized, when I had been traveling for so long, I knew very little about my own music as a Malaysian. So that, interestingly, being exposed to ethnomusicology in Australia sparked my interest in studying Malaysian music, upon which I started reading more about Malaysian ethnomusicology. Very important ethnomusicologists like Tan Sui Beng, the professor at University Science Malaysia, who wrote about this Malaysian art form called Bangsawan, and also the work by Professor Muhammad Anis Noor, who's also a prominent ethnomusicologist, who wrote about traditional Malay music and dance called Zapin, for example. And that got me really interested. So I would say that my entry point, or the connecting point between being a jazz musician and an ethnomusicologist, was to find something that would interest me. And so in the national conscious of most Malaysians, or people who grew up in Malaysia, is the music of P. Ramlee, a very iconic film star from the 1950s and 1960s, who was also a very prolific music composer and musician. And a lot of the sounds of his music in the films of the time reminded me of jazz. It was a lot more complex than that, but that was the honors thesis that I wrote as a master's student, was on a style of music called keroncong, which was evident in one of his films. So I analysed this song called Keroncong Kuala Lumpur, which was in a film called Anak Bapa that was released in the 1960s. So that was my foray into ethnomusicology.
Okay, so from understanding from what I've read about what you have published, other than being obviously like a musician, but you're also a scholar predominantly in music, yes?
That's right.
However, it's also my understanding that you have written quite a bit about music in relation to film, or scoring and soundtracks, and that's what really interests me, because this is the Department of Film and Theatre at Sunway University, where we offer the Bachelor in Digital Film Production. So let's shift straight away to talking about movies, especially about music in movies. So, very simple question, especially for people who may not be novices, who may not understand music in film. Sorry, how do you think music shapes the audience's emotional experience in a film?
I think the beauty about film is that it is a multimedia form of art. And when film first started, it wasn't synchronized to sound. So silent films had to actually be accompanied by live music. So in film and sound studies, it's well known that music was the bridge between an audience that was not used to seeing ghostly images projected on a screen. If they were to see that, imagine you're somewhere in the 1900s, right, and you're seeing moving images on a screen in a dark room for the first time in your life, and it's completely silent. That would obviously be very unnerving. So the theory is that they had to add accompanying piano music.
Yes, that makes sense. I mean, they're all like, reports of early viewings of moving images of people fainting.
Exactly. So,
and there was no music. They were just like stunned by the images. But then again, they were only used to a tradition of vaudeville, for instance, whereby music accompanied movement on a stage or acting on a stage in various countries. But anyway, let's get back to film. So yes, once we've moved on to the talkies, the first major exploitation everywhere was making musicals.
Exactly. I think it's this natural progression, and it's the intricate link between film, music, and sound that is so essential. But I guess to kind of anchor us back to discussion about how music shapes the audience's emotional experience, I think it is basically I believe that music and sound is the expression of these internal emotional feelings that that you can evoke from an audience that cannot be expressed through the visual medium. So the visual medium almost seems it is removed from the human body when they're experiencing it, but sound and music becomes internalized in a way. It's felt as well. Like now when we have Dolby and we have surround sound systems, it's not just about what you hear, but it's about what you feel, because music and sound is related to vibrations and movement of air. So that, I think, immerses the audience into the realm of suspended disbelief even more, which I think is what a lot of filmmakers are trying to shoot for when they're going for their films. Yeah,
absolutely. And let's get deeper into this. Italian director, the legendary Sergio Leone, he said, to use his own words, he said, "I have always said that my best dialogue and screenwriter is Ennio Morricone." Ennio Morricone is this legendary composer who's written like more than 400 film scores and compositions and whatever you want. And he only just passed away a few years ago at the age of 90 something or whatever. And so the Sergio Leone said, because many times it is more important to have a note or an orchestration than a line being said. And here, for people who may not know about the films of Sergio Leone, very famous for a number of spaghetti westerns in particular, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, with A Few Dollars More, A Fistful of Dollars, and then the last thing he did was Once Upon a Time in America. And he always used Ennio Morricone as his only composer in all these films. And that's what he said, that because Morricone had somehow this ability to fill in music which actually said a lot more than even words or writing dialogue for that matter. So for those who may have seen his films, they will probably understand that. You can see excerpts of those on YouTube, I suppose. So hence the idea is, can music sometimes be used to tell us things that the dialogue or visuals do not?
Absolutely. I think you've encapsulated that in explaining how closely, the close bond between Ennio Morricone and Sergio Leone. I think music expresses the emotional and also narrative elements that a film director or filmmaker cannot express, that is limited through the visual and mise-en-scène and all these other mediums as well. So music adds that extra layer or complements the visual elements as well. Not only does it tell things that the dialogue and visuals do not, I think it also has this important role of providing paradox and contrast. I think one of the most powerful devices of using music in film is using contrast, music that is contrary to the emotional representation in the visual scene. And I think filmmakers love this, and I think as fans of films, we love seeing these moments as well. It creates this sense of juxtaposition and disjuncture that is very difficult to replicate in other mediums. I think because you have that combination, right, of music and visuals. But also, I think it also expresses the complexity of human emotions and expression. Because, I mean, if I ask you, Rama, if I ask you, like, are you feeling happy today? You're right? And then you probably say, yeah, I'm good. But there's a lot more behind that, right? I don't know what you went through today. I don't know that, maybe we're going through some stresses at work, but maybe we're happy, we have a happy relationship in our family. So these kind of paradoxes are things that music can help to ignite in the expression of a visual medium like film. But yeah, we're going deep. I love it. It's great.
And then I would like to, moving from Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone, let's come back to Malaysia.
Yeah.
And am I aware that in the past you have expressed a voice of prejudice criticism regarding Yasmin Ahmad and her films? So what you just said about relating to Sergio Leone's relationship with Ennio Morricone in regards to compositions and film scoring in what they worked on. So do you think that could also apply to Yasmin Ahmad's Sepet, which, by the way, did not have a dedicated credited music composer, except Yasmin Ahmad used a mix of existing songs, atmospheric instrumentals, and the traditional Malaysian tunes. So did that still do the same thing that, for instance, like Morricone did for Sergio Leone's films? Did you think that worked for Sepet in the way that Yasmin Ahmad used this kind of soundtrack?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, if anybody watches the opening scene of the film Sepet or just experiences the film in its entirety, one is very aware of how much Yasmin Ahmad loved music. Just a side fact, Yasmin Ahmad also had a foray into being a recording artist. And she actually played the piano and sang at one point of her life.
She was a trained musician.
She was a trained musician, right. Which also indicates her very astute ability to select, to curate specific works like classical Western works, for example. But it's the dizzying array of, aside from the use of music to evoke the sentimentalities of the characters and the narrative, which were very powerful, she also had this amazing knowledge of a multicultural variety of Malaysian-related music. And Malaysia being a multicultural society, she expressed this so clearly in the opening scene of her film Sepet, where she very rapidly and very intensely introduces the audience to different sounds, different musical sounds and languages, and different types of music, just within the opening scene alone. So yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. And also just to add, after Sepet, because it was an independently produced film, and film composers aren't cheap, at least if you want to be fair to them, she did end up also working with Hardesh Singh in her future films, and also with the singer-songwriter Pete Teo, where she also did some musical style films as well later on in her career.
Yeah. So other than Yasmin Ahmad, who obviously sort of did apply this kind of thing you're just talking about, so do you think that to what extent have other Malaysian film directors from the last 10-15 years used soundtrack as a dominant component of storytelling. For instance, as you mentioned just now, Yasmin Ahmad did that in the opening of Sepet, right? Her use of a very sort of specific use of a soundtrack to sort of convey some kind of emotion, to get the audience to engage, storytelling. So to what extent have other Malaysian filmmakers, use soundtrack as a dominant component of storytelling? And perhaps if you have any example in mind.
I mean, to be very honest, past Yasmin Ahmad, I haven't really been keeping too much track on films, but I would love maybe the students and audience can call in and let us know. But from like my most recent memory of Malaysian films, I can't really recall a filmmaker that uses a variety of music in Malaysia in the same way. And I think it's worth actually investigating. To be very honest, I think yourself and your students should really look into this. The most recent films within the 10 to 15 years, have they employed music in a multivarious way in the same intensity that Yasmin Ahmad did? I would, based on some of the more recent films that I have seen, I've seen Malaysian films that have played with film as an aesthetic genre, which sets the tone for the film and the style for the film, more than a device to highlight multiculturalism. So I remember the film Pekat. No, was it? Yes. No, Pekat. Yes, Pekat was one of the films, and I think it has Sharifah Amani in it. But please, everyone, please check my facts later. But I remember seeing films like that actually employ more of a sonic aesthetic and style with the use of their soundtracks. What I can actually share is the complete opposite of what Yasmin Ahmad did in a more recent and popular film. Now, in more recent years, what I would call ethno-nationalist films that really emphasize a certain race or the heritage of a certain race as being dominant have been quite popular. So there's a film called Mat Kilau that was directed by a very, very successful Malaysian director, Syamsul Yusof. Yep. And you can hear in the soundtrack there is this very explicit attempt to embody sounds of Malayness through the use of traditional music instruments. For example, like the rebab, you hear sounds that sound very much like the traditional joget gamelan, the accompanying music that is used to, sorry, not joget gamelan, the gamelan silat or gendang silat, which is the music that is used to accompany the traditional Malay martial arts called silat. And I know this because shout out to my friend Santosh Logendran, who was actually the composer for the music of the film Mat Kilau. He took a personal initiative to find and source traditional Malay musicians to express that narrative or message of the Mat Kilau film. And interestingly enough, I think I'll leave it at that. I have some other tidbits about the film, but I think I'll keep it at that for now.
Well, since you went that direction, I'm just gonna digress slightly. Actually, not digress. I'm gonna ask a very abstract question. Since you're a music scholar, what is the sound of Malaysian-ness?
Oh, I love that question, and I hate that question at the same time.
I know. It's a love-hate relationship, absolutely.
When I try to answer that question, and when we engage with non-Western scholars, and I'm sure it's the same from the global south, right, and from Asia and the Caribbean, we are always met with puzzled and lost looks. But when we interact, when we share our answers with people from the global south, we all also acknowledge it, right? We have this silent acknowledgement of, yes, it's complex. So basically the answer is, what is the Malaysian sound in music? It is a very diverse one. It's not something that we can pin down as a singular sound, but I think it's a very specific mix of diversities.
So it doesn't come down to simply just one of the ethnic groups here.
Absolutely not for me anyway.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Not for me.
But it's a combination of diverse forms from the
space
groups.
And I think about it right now in my work. I'm thinking about Malaysian or Southeast Asian music as a confluence of sounds, the confluences of cultural influences. I think the best analogy would be a dish. like would be the culinary one, because we're in Malaysia, right, and we love our food. So Malaysian food being nasi lemak, like maybe our signature dish is nasi lemak. We can claim it, or Malaysians can claim it as a Malaysian dish, but it doesn't just belong to Malaysia. It also exists in Singapore,
Indonesia.
it has, and other parts of Asia. It has all kinds of different dishes within one dish that have diverse sources. Like it has anchovies or ikan bilis that also shows that we are in a very maritime space and that we're surrounded by water, and seafood is essential and important. We have sambal, which has of course has roots in Indonesia, but there might even be some exchanges with South Asia as well, in that coconut rice, where it is definitely native to the land, but there are many variations of this in South Asia as well, you know. So, and then there are also variations of nasi lemak that we have in Malaysia. In Kuala Lumpur alone, you can have a more Chinese tasting nasi lemak with certain types of spices, and you can have a more Malay tasting nasi lemak depending on who the vendor is. And that's the complexity with which I view Malaysian music as well. There's a sense of distinction in its complexity. There's a sense of distinction in its diversity. And Indonesians are, I think, even more diverse in many ways. They have the national phrase Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means unity in diversity.
Yes.
And so Malaysia, I think most maritime Southeast Asian cultures deal with that complexity as well. Is there a Malaysian sound? Maybe we can define it through different eras. Maybe different eras have stricter limitations on how those sounds circulated and permeated and were consumed by the listening public.
So it's like a hodgepodge of different cultures. So in that way, would you say that like Makila, since you mentioned it's only a Malay sounding, it doesn't really sound Malaysian in comparison to Sepet?
Very much so. And I think, interestingly though, while I agree with you that it was definitely sonically an attempt to sound very Malay, to emphasize Malayness through the use of traditional instruments and sounds, if you watch a lot of other Malay films that are very strictly catered to a Malay-centric, mono-ethnic audience, you might hear music that's not strictly Malay. In fact, what I do know right now in the Malay music, in the Malay film industry, a lot of films are using library sounds and library music. So you would probably hear generic sounding music that comes from a Western, like, you know, a global or
library
Western
music,
sounding library music, which you got, as film students, you probably have to, right? Because you don't have access to composers. So, yeah, it's interesting because it also shows that the act of ethnicizing your film music can also hone in that ethno-national message or political message that you want to rally forth in the message of the film. And maybe it's also, I would argue that maybe the music for Mat Kila was one of the major contributors to its success, you know. Yet at the same time, I remember seeing one movie poster where the composer's name wasn't present. So you know, so you see this as well. And the fact, of course, the very fascinating fact that the composer of the film is ethnic Indian, right? And that composer took the initiative to create music that was ethnicized, where that may not have been the case if he wasn't chosen to be the composer. But I digress. There are moves towards creating a more Malaysian sound. I'm very close friends with another Malaysian film composer, Rendra Zawawi, who recently worked with Zahir Omar in his film Mikhail, which is a supernatural comedy action film. And Rendra was sharing me his process of having to embody a Malay rocker sound in his soundtrack. So we also have different personas in Malaysia. We have multiple characters who like different types of music. We have Malaysians who are metalheads, Malaysians who like indie, Malaysians who like traditional music and pop and etc. So he had to personify that era of Malay rock or heavy metal, which was very popular in the 80s and 90s. And Rendra was telling me about his creative journey of trying to listen to this music deeply and then compose a theme song that embodied that was still also modern. So I think there are some Malaysian composers that are also doing this in a very sensitive way to the culture as well.
That reminds me of something that I did, and here I'm going to get a bit theoretical, some years ago, to conceptualize Australian cinema. And I did that by applying hybridity theory as derived from post-colonial theory. Yeah. And that's why, like what you were talking about. So there I was saying, well, yes, you have this, what is Australian-ness in the cinema. But then it's also a combination of things Australian, but also things imported in the concept of cinema from Hollywood, from Europe, different cinematic traditions. And the same thing I figured out also applied in the context of music in Australia. And I guess perhaps that's what you're kind of referring to. That's what the connection I'm making here. And you know, the sort of Malaysian-ness is the hybridizing of, well, what is Malaysian, or certain things that can be sort of recognized, accepted as being Malaysian, and some other things, like your example of Nasi Lemak, for instance. Yes, the same applies in the context of cinema and the context of music. Yeah, so there is some kind of foundation that is recognizably Malaysian, and then there are others that, well, they belong to something else, but we sort of Malaysianize it, so make it sort of, you know, adapt, because that is what everybody does in cultural production, adaptation, hybridization, to fit into a local context somehow, and eventually it speaks to the world, doesn't it? I suspect that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And that's and to talk about Yasmin Ahmad again, since we started with her, and to get, much has been written about the Orchid trilogy, that's what is known. That's like the 3 films that she made, you know, one after another. Much has been written about the Orchid trilogy's perspective on post-colonialism and multiculturalism in Malaysia. So how relevant is that kind of perspective in Malaysian cinema in 2026? Again, take into mind like what I was talking about, hybridization, and I think she was addressing in much of that, not just on screen, but also in theoretical terms. If I remember, I think the second one was referring to France Fanon, for instance. Yeah, so that's what I was talking about. So, but to what extent is that kind of perspective still relevant in Malaysian cinema in 2026?
I think that's a wonderful question. In terms of the relevance of understanding the post-colonial context of Malaysian identity in Malaysia currently, I think that's very important, because where there are social or cultural tensions that emerge in the politics of Malaysia and how we talk about ourselves, I think the current context, the current generation, and those, you know, who are living through this period have to have that an understanding of where we quote unquote came from, or the power structures that have formed us and shaped our identity, and also the solidarities that we have with other colonized communities and societies in other parts of the world as well, like across the Commonwealth, for example, across other countries that were colonized, and how that has affected how people in these post-colonial societies have constructed their sense of identity, but have also created unequal power structures between peoples of different races, different backgrounds.
Although we could argue that those unequal power structures were leftovers from the colonizers,
absolutely,
who divided and conquered pretty much everywhere they went, whichever country they were from.
Absolutely. So I think a sensitivity to that is important. My question though is, and I mean, maybe we can like start doing some generation speak. And Jet, I would love to know your experience as a Malaysian too, and as a student. Like, was there any point in your studies that you were exposed to the idea of post-colonialism in as a student?
Actually, okay. First thing, I'm not a film student actually. I'm a psych student, and I have learned about a lot of these like colonialism, especially back in high school. I think my knowledge on that a lot doesn't actually come from textbook itself, but actually Malaysian art. And everybody knows that art is a form of voice when censorship comes to mind. Yeah, and that's how I see it. I also grew up in Penang, and a lot of the like just going to Georgetown Himbus, that area, you can find so much wonderful art of the people and them talking about their history, and so it's inspiring. And I would say I learned more about Malaysia as a whole there than in the textbooks.
There you go. So I think that's a wonderful example of the fact that we need to engage past our institutions of knowledge, especially the ones that for those of us Malaysians who go through government school and then we get a certain script of what that history is, or if we absorb media, although nowadays media is media is completely dispersed. But I think that definitely in terms of its relevance, I think absolutely yes. The question is, are we having that kind of dialogue that we might be having today, intergenerationally or even across people with different bases of knowledge, to get people to think about these identities, about post-colonialism? And to answer that question, a Yasmin Ahmad film is a wonderful starting point to do that for Malaysian audience. But we have to also have that conversation about what does she mean by the representations there. I think, and that's perhaps the project that we need to embark on. Relevance, short answer, yes.
Okay. Just one last question about Yasmin Ahmad before we move on to other things. So, a lot of our students in the Bachelor of Digital Film Production program at Sunway University are usually like, in their early 20s, 18, 19, 20, like that. So what do you reckon these students as current aspiring filmmakers in Malaysia could hope to learn from watching Yasmin Ahmad's short films and feature films? Short films as well, she's got a huge body of work, so great short films that were made more than 15 years ago, at a time when the current aspiring filmmakers were just like toddlers. So why would you encourage them to go and watch all those short films and all her feature films?
I mean, I think the same way that you watch a Sergio Leone film, and the same way that, I'm a huge Star Wars geek, so, the same way that you probably watch Star Wars to get the basics of the production and how a story is told, I would watch a Yasmin Ahmad film. I would get the students in Sunway's program and beyond the digital film program as well, to watch these films, to understand, to get a sense of the time. But there is also something, Yasmin Ahmad her films are very, very late 90s to early 2000s Malaysia.
Yeah.
So in order to really get a sense of that, then the students of film, the storytellers, would have to do their homework and read up on some of the political history as well of what was going on then. In the early 2000s, Malaysia was politically in a state where there was very little political change at that stage. We only started to see changing ruling political parties much later on. But the early 2000s was the start of the dialogue to change beyond the status quo. And also, not only can they learn about Malaysia at the time and what Malaysians were like, it's also a very important moment for Malaysian independent filmmaking. So the early 2000s was a time when there was a wealth of DIY, do-it-yourself independent filmmakers in Malaysia. I'm sure in other parts of the world as well, because of the advent of digital filmmaking technologies, which democratize the ability for people to make films. Right, in the 90s, you had to have a lot of money to make a film, but with digital cameras that were getting cheaper in the 2000s, more and more people had access to being able to tell their own stories. So you did see a kind of growth of that in the 2000s. But the other thing that I would watch Yasmin Ahmad's films for is her knack for telling a story and for delivering a message. Because Yasmin Ahmad, aside from her full-time gig was actually she worked for the Leo Burnett advertising agency. So that's why I really appreciate that you mentioned her short film, because a lot of her short films are actually advertisements, but they screen like short films, because she tells these very engaging and relatable stories. So it's that social relatability of how she delivers these messages. It's a very good case study for Malaysian students.
For younger generations who don't know this, Yasmin Ahmad shot to fame, especially through a number of TV commercials, made during major festive periods, such as Raya, Deepavali, and things like that. And everybody sort of got it as Malaysians. And that's how like he shot to fame and then eventually sort of got into the feature film and production world.
This is Sun for You Radio, coming to you from the campus of Sunway University in Malaysia.
You mentioned something earlier about ethno-nationalism?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the question. Do you think music in that sense of ethno-nationalism, music in Malaysian films has played a role in shaping national identity? And you mentioned the example earlier of Mat Kilau, perhaps as one example of that. But has there been other films who also did that, going in the direction of shaping national identity in Malaysia with this sort of ethno-nationalist approach to film scoring?
Absolutely. Probably not insofar as film scoring specifically, but if I were to draw on the work that I did for my PhD and for my book, Cosmopolitan Intimacies, which was on the independence era of Malay films in the 1950s and 1960s, the omnipresent and dominant figure is P. Ramlee, who I mentioned earlier, right? And P. Ramlee, through the musical film, not necessarily through scored film soundtracks, but through his through his film songs, definitely shaped the Malaysian imagination. I talked to many Malaysians who are not ethnically Malay, who are in their 60s and 70s. A lot of my friends' parents actually relate to P. Ramlee deeply as someone through his music and films represented an inclusive vision of what Malaysia could be beyond just Malays and Malay culture and ethnicity. And I think the reason is because the music of the time, based on what I was researching, was very popular in that it wasn't ethnicized music per se. It was sung in the Malay language, but it drew on many different genres of music. Interestingly, it drew on a lot of Latin American forms of music because that was the pop music of the time. That was the music that people would dance to in a cabaret club. And he also drew, of course, from jazz sounds, musicals, and that was just the popular music of the time. Someone that I interviewed then, the late Kasim Masdo, who worked with P. Ramlee, who was involved with making music for Shaw Brothers films, he used the word commercial songs or commercial music. He told me that Malay audiences at the time, in the 50s and 60s, wanted to hear commercial sounding music, not traditional sounding music. But I think, as an offshoot to that the ability to create a kind of national or local narrative about what being Malaysian is through these songs that were also inclusive in that they managed to draw in people from many different backgrounds and many linguistic backgrounds. It allowed them to imagine a Malaysia, both visually and sonically, that was theirs, that they could call their own, where they could have a sense of belonging. So yes, once again, that P. Ramlee is extremely important.
So since you mentioned P. Ramlee, I'm taking that he was very much a strong part of your doctoral work, is it?
Exactly.
Okay,
yes.
so hence you might remind me or us of the first. I got here. I didn't grow up watching P. Ramlee. When I come to this part of the world, I watch a number of P. Ramlee movies that come up on Sundays on free-to-air TV, TV2 or TV3, whatever. And I still remember till now, you probably might remember the title of this movie, and it struck me, and a good thing it had subtitles in English. And I realized eventually, like, P. Ramlee was not just a filmmaker, he was also a musician. He played the sax, he played other instruments, also a composer, was a scriptwriter, a lot of things all went together. In that film, I remember, he played it was set in the, I think, early 60s, black and white. And he would be playing in these sort of jazz clubs, I suppose, the saxophone. At the end of it, that one was very tragic one. He actually removed his eyes with some forks, I think, or spoons or whatever. What was the name of that movie again?
It's called Ibu Mertuaku,
yes.
My mother-in-law.
And then I talked to other Malaysian colleagues at the time. They explained to me it was also a reflection of this dilemma of Malaysians at the time, sort of around the sort of independence era, between urbanization, the modern, and the traditional. So how would you sort of, was I on the right track?
Yes, you're on that is hands down one of my favorite P. Ramlee films, and one of the most important case studies in my book.
Right.
Ibu Mertuaku, my mother-in-law, represented this transition from transition into modernity in the Malay in the Malay world, in Malaysia and Singapore. And it was a very important narrative for ethnic Malay society at that time, that I think then also translated to other Malaysians as well. It was very relatable. This move from the rural to the urban spaces, represented through the allegory of a famous musician who recorded at a radio studio much like this.
Yes.
And then encounters a very wealthy woman who falls in love with the sound of his voice and the sound of his saxophone, and then finds out that he cannot sustain a life to sustain her family status, right? And then he goes down this pathway of tragedy. He gets rediscovered again, even though he's now blind, and then he's operated on. He's saved by the husband of his former wife. So that's the tragedy. When he opens his eyes, he realizes that everything is false. Everything is not real. It's not genuine, and that's why the story goes. That's why he dismembers dismembers his own eyes.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a proper word for removing one's eyes from their sockets.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great film. I've talked to people, what time I hear about here. Detractors of P. Ramlee said, he only made what was popular. But that was one of those things that struck me like, this is like deeply philosophical.
Absolutely.
And there's so much so many layers in that film. And the use of music is precisely, on its own, is projecting that, I suppose you could call it the Malay dilemma at that point,
Yes.
of urbanization and the rural, and especially for the use of saxophone in playing jazz in a jazz club in somewhere, I think in KL, I forgot where it was set.
Singapore.
Yeah, that's right. That was pre-independence, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was Malaya.
1961.
Yeah.
1962.
Anyway, there was
sorry.
still much connection there, and that's what I picked up. So because he was a musician as well as a director and a scriptwriter, so he made those connections. And until much later, and even somebody like me who came got into this much later, said, wow, I got it. And especially by the fact that it did help that I had done some work about hybridity and post-colonial theory earlier, but even without that, you can still get it. That's what, and from what I understand, even later generations of Malaysians also read something similar into this. They understood this. Again, we digress a little bit. Do you think there is perhaps a need to address this? There's a new dilemma now. It may not be urbanization and the rural move to urban. It may be some other thing. So is there a need to sort of address this kind of identity dilemma, I suppose, now? And what might that identity dilemma be in this right now in 2026?
I mean, maybe I'm speaking from a more personal and observational standpoint as somebody that, I love interacting with, I have undergraduate students as well. I think increasing social alienation and anxiety on a global scale that's digitally mediated. Of course, AI is the buzzword now, but it's more than just that. I think it's the saturation of media that we have, the tyranny of choice that we're faced with every day, and what we are what we're told to consume, algorithms being fed to us. But that's just my own personal take. On a social level, I do see a lot of optimism with the younger generation, at least with those of you who identify as Gen Z. I see, on one hand, there is a kind of conservatism, a political conservatism in the younger Malaysian generation that seems to be projected in the mainstream. But I also know that there are elements of resistance and subversion in different subcultural groups. The question is, I mean, who's controlling the message? It's not the government anymore. You know, it used to be in the 90s and the early 2000s when Malaysian government could easily control broadcast media, but you can't do that anymore. So is it the Broligarchy? Is it the Sam Altmans and the Elon Musk that are, you know, controlling that? I don't know. I feel that may be the issue. I feel like I'm not even in a position to say what that is, because I feel that it is the younger generation or the current generation that we are helping to guide and educate that need to tell us what that is. And I think maybe that relates to questions that we might have about what should filmmakers do now, like what should they be aware of, or what should creators, what should artists tune into. Definitely also on a more political front is global, like it's geopolitics right now, because geopolitics are very real and they're affecting us in very stark ways, and authoritarianism on a global scale, I think is something that everyone is relating to, but everyone is adhering to different ideologies and different messages as well, and different alignments. So where is the where are we, right? I think there's once again, like, maybe the complexity and diversity that we've always had to talk that we've always had to use to talk about Southeast Asia, about the global south, is now happening now on a global scale as well, with the advent of, I mean, I think I'm getting a bit opaque here, but
look,
maybe you can help anchor me back to reality.
Well, now this question and issue, this question and issue is, perhaps we don't have the answer for it, but it is relevant, highly relevant, for us as educators. And as educators, I don't have an answer to that question either. However, what I can do is try to get my students perhaps to be conscious of the issue, at least to think about it, right? And then how does that get translated? Then through your practice. Whether you're a film student, whether you're a music student, that carries through in your practice of production, in your composition, in your script writing. Because at least if you are consciously thinking of that question, I say there's a doubt, there may not be just one answer to that question, but at least if, like, younger generations are thinking about it, that's a good start. And for instance, like, in your other persona as a musician, and my colleague Asmil, Yusof, Asmil, as a musician, indie musician, he's been addressing a lot of that in his singing and songwriting. So the idea is he doesn't have all the answers either, but at least he's sort of bringing some things up, so that people at least can think about it consciously, as opposed to simply, like, ignoring it altogether. But anyway, let's sort of move back to film scores and music in film. And I'm just going to ask one here. Yes, why do you think certain film songs in this case, remain in people's memories for decades? Because of melody, nostalgia, cultural memory, or the emotional moment attached to particular scenes?
Is it more like song or soundtrack?
Well, songs tend to last longer in the psyche.
Pop cultural songs, especially.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, especially our generation, despite never hearing Mr. Blue Sky when it was famous, we associate that with a lot of movies because it's used so prominently. But even so, like movie soundtracks, there are a few that stick with people a lot compared to those that don't. A few that I can mention off the top of my head. These are like very pop culture based, but Interstellar, people remember the soundtrack and can like locate it immediately. Up the beginning sequence, or a lot of superhero or Star Wars, like for example, because I think a lot of them have leitmotifs that kind of go with the character, that keeps repeated along with different tones as the story goes on. I think that's one of the reasons, but I would like to hear what you think about this actually.
I like what you said about leitmotifs, and that's something that I explore in my work as well. And I think to answer the question of essentially we're asking the question of what is the power of music delivered through films. I think whether they be songs or scored music or themes, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. the leitmotif is the melody, at least, combined with rhythm, that we can all immediately relate to, and it sticks in our heads. And then each individual can locate that melody or that sound, that music, to the moment, the emotion, and the time in which they experience that film.
Could you think of like other examples of like songs in the context of Malaysian cinema that did that? They have like this lead song that end up being quite popular and sort of eventually anchor in like people's minds, I suppose.
Well, I mean the iconic song is a song called Getaran Jiwa by Ramlee.
Right.
So I have to go back to my work on
Sure.
Ramlee again. But that is a song. As a musician, right? When you go and play weddings and it doesn't matter what their cultural background is, if there's a request for a Malay song, it's almost always Getaran Jiwa, especially among non-Malay audiences, because that's the kind of go-to song that people know as a sound that they know. And there were different versions of it as well. But the reason why I think that song has such an impact is because the film that it was in was released in the 1960s. And the story of the song is about an unrequited love between people. It's a Romeo and Juliet song, basically. Unrequited love. The story of the film is about unrequited love between people from different classes, right? But the song is really just a sentimental one about being in love, right? So what I think is powerful about a song in a film is people's ability to relate that song to the film's narrative, which gives it even more kind of narrative power. But vice versa, a lot of people know the song but don't know the film.
Yeah.
Right? So that's another. But if not for the film, that song would not have existed. Yeah.
And that's what I just remember the name of the artist. I think it was Ning
Ning
Baizura.
Baizura.
And she did this like very commercially successful song as well for a horror film. That was like 10-15 years ago, quite a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago. And it sort of got me, and then I wanted to watch the film. And it was very popular. The film was popular, the song was popular. So it stayed like, it anchored into the psyche of people for one reason or another. Another one also, I'm just thinking, just
no
one
worries,
more.
sorry.
Because he's still performing, Amy Search and Search, Isabella, which was actually a movie.
Which was a movie, exactly.
A lot of people don't realize that. Isabella is actually a movie.
Yeah.
And until now, people will still expect, Amy Search to perform Isabella live.
Exactly.
And it still sounds great. So what is it at the time? It was, again, talking about hybridity. Search, Amy and all that, they have acknowledged their influences from the Scorpions, from all these American rock bands and hard rock bands and all that. But somehow this became like a Malaysian anthem.
Yeah.
Still is.
Absolutely.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, great.
Isabella the song and Isabella the movie.
So I mean that's a case of where the song came before the movie, because the song had such a huge social impact.
Huge impact.
And
yes.
across the waters as well. It was very popular in Malaysia and in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And bands like Search, led by the singer Amy, were iconic for this. Well, we would understand it. Those of us who are familiar with Western heavy metal would understand it as glam metal, or a mix between just standard straight ahead heavy metal and glam metal. The Malay metal was very unique in it had this combination of the aesthetic, the fashion aesthetic was a combination of thrash metal and glam and hair metal.
Yes.
Yeah, so it was this nice kind of mix in between. But the songs, while they had heavy songs and more upbeat songs, it was the ballads.
Yes.
So it was the power of the ballad. So for me, I think it was the right moment. So with any commercial work of art, it's also getting in the right moment when yet again the cycle repeats itself, I think, because in the 80s to the 90s you also have a mass migration of youth from rural areas to the city, and the soundtrack for these working class youth was rock.
Yeah, it was rock, yes. And very much like what Ramlee was doing. Except it was jazz or something. Jazz. That was the language of migration within the country. That is from the countryside to the urban areas. The 80s, the same thing happened. Yes, except the language changed to rock, and also translated here from music, but also to film. Ramlee, and later on also 80s, a number of films included like rock soundtracks.
There's a whole series of mud rock films.
Yes,
rock
mud rock films. Yes,
rock ooh.
Yep.
Called,
Again, that's sort of helping our younger generations of Malaysian students who probably may not even have heard of this, but there is such a thing, a genre that exists in Malaysian cinema, the rock ooh thing from the 90s, 80s in particular. Yeah, and it might make a comeback. Who knows?
Possibly anything's possible with Generation Z.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. Just now, what I wanted to point out is that when you said that since a song has already seeped into the psyche of people when you use it in the film, it kind of sparks back that emotion. I can't really think of examples. He pointed out a few good ones, but I'm thinking that there are also versions where they use a song that most people associate with a positive emotion, but then turns it on its head, and it kind of shifts the tone of the scene. An example I can pull up is Singing in the Rain, used in Clockwork Orange. Yeah. And a more modern example, Push by Matchbox 20, used in Barbie to show toxic masculinity. Yeah. I feel like those are scenes in films that actually catch my attention, where the music itself is of a different meaning, and most people associate it with a different meaning, but in the context of the scene, they flip it on its head, and then somehow I remember them more.
Do you think Malaysian cinema needs to be more daring in the way it uses music and sound? Again, you decide what you want to define daring as. That is, it should be doing something that it is not doing. For instance, we just talked about contrapuntal use.
Yeah.
Maybe it hasn't not been a lot of that in the context of Malaysian cinema. Example of Tarantino, example of Oliver Stone, and many others have done that. I can't think of a lot of that being used in Malaysian cinema. The contrapuntal use of score, music, and soundtracks to get the sort of opposite effect than expected.
Exactly. I think I can't speak so authoritatively. You've probably seen more recent films than I have lately, but I definitely agree. I've not known of any iconic scenes in some of Malaysian films lately that have done that. In terms of being daring, I think it would be unfair to say that of Malaysian films, because I do have some personal contacts that are trying.
Right.
But perhaps it's the restraints of the commercial industry. But I think we need to give them a chance to show their muscle. I think there's going to be I believe that there will be a shift.
Yeah.
I think we are starting to see a shift with film scorers like Rendra Zawawi and Santosh Logandran. In many ways, even though Mat Kilau was a ethno-nationalist film, according to me, the use of very very stark and explicit Malay traditional music sounds, in a way, was very daring in comparison to the genre of films that Syamsul Yusof normally creates. So perhaps that was breaking some boundaries, and I'm wondering if there's more room for that now as well. And if we listen to the soundtrack that Rendra Zawawi produced for Mikhail, I know for a fact that there was a lot of creative work put in there, and a lot of collaboration between Zahir, Omar, and Rendra to create something meaningful and different, yet also appealing to the audience. So I think we need to give them a bit of a chance. But to answer that question, of course, definitely, creatively, we should all go for it.
So that links to then this other question. What kind of sounds or musical traditions do you think are still underrepresented in Malaysian films? And perhaps we started to mention the example of this composer with Mikhail, perhaps starting to precisely do that. That is, what are those sounds? What are those sort of musical traditions that are underrepresented?
You know what? I just recalled something. There was a film which is related to this question. Film called Jagat by Shankar Perumal.
Perumal, yes.
Beautiful,
yes,
and I would say a very daring soundtrack. It's almost like the antithesis to Mat Kilau in its soundtrack.
Yes.
It's a very Tamil Malaysian story that is not typical for a South Asian film. So it's very Malaysian in its narrative and the way it's presented.
Yeah.
And it uses music from a group called the Space Gambos Orchestra, where they use the Malay lute, the gambos, in a very psychedelic way throughout the soundtrack to create a very interesting mood. So yeah, I guess it's just if you circling back to that question. So this is the example of something that Malaysian filmmakers are starting to
Being daring.
Being
Yes.
daring. It's a great
Yes,
example.
Perumal is a great example, and I
Yes.
would not simply limit it to Jagat. It's a Jagat trilogy.
Yes.
Jagat, Machai, and Blues. Because the themes are there, and the theme is there, and the sort of musical approach to it follows that through, and perhaps yes, it is being done. Hopefully, maybe by more, but yes, this daring or opening up traditions and sounds that that have been underrepresented now coming through and to good use. It actually worked because it contributed very much to the kind of themes that obviously Perumal carries through in his filmmaking.
This is Sun for You Radio, coming to you from the campus of Sunway University in Malaysia.
As I am a young filmmaker, what do you have to give on to the younger generation about music in movies, like composing?
Oh yes, I mean, I was going to say that listen to music. Really enjoy music, delve music deeply as a fan of music. Maybe there's specific types of music that you like, but delve deeply into the music, and that I think will complement your filmmaking in a very meaningful way. I think some of the best filmmakers are huge fans of music themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would add to that something which I tell my students with films. Said, watch every kind of film. Good films, bad films, A films, B films, Z films. In music, the same thing. Listen to commercial stuff. Listen to indie, underground, no genre, no wave. There's all kinds of categorization of it, because that's how you expand your horizons. So if you're composing music, listen to as many and diverse things as possible, because that's going to feed your driving in terms of music composition. Would you agree as a musician?
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to listen wide, as much as you have to listen deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the other thing that maybe we don't do enough, myself included, is listening to films.
Yeah.
It's really, and I love sound as well. I love production sound. I love Foley.
Yeah.
As a Star Wars fan, it's all about sound design.
Yeah.
That brings you to the reality. So I think as an aspiring filmmaker, aside from listening and watching widely, is spending time to maybe watch a film that you really love, but switching off, honing in on the sounds and the music instead. Yeah.
Indeed, because soundtrack, it's not just like score, the film score and the songs used, but also a whole bunch of the sounds, sound effects and so on, including the absence of sound, silence, used, for instance, very effectively in that movie came out 2 years ago, The Sound of Metal, which is actually about the drama of a heavy metal band going deaf.
I need to see
Which
that.
won got a lot of awards, or at least nominations. I think it's called The Sound of Metal. Came out about 2 or 3 years ago. It's amazing, because how do you project on screen a heavy metal drummer who's actually going deaf, and he's not at the beginning telling his bandmates, but again, it's an incredible sort of emotional thing going on. And a lot of films have done that, very effectively. So so I would say yes, you're right. To aspiring filmmakers, watch as many films as possible, but also yes, pay attention to the sound, not just the film score, not just to the songs, but also to all the different kind of sounds and absence of sounds that make up, that constitute a soundtrack. And these days we don't have excuses, because from my days, from the Jurassic era, there was only 2 speakers and stereophonic sound, and sometimes not even that. I still got vinyls which have got the label mono on them.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, mono, right? That's another story. And then now you don't have an excuse, because now you've got Dolby Sound, Atmos, and you can go to any theater. They will have this system. Plus, you've got your, what's it called? IMAX.
IMAX. Yeah.
And if anybody has ever looked behind, they'll never show you that. But if you look behind the screens, the curtains, it's a wall
of
of various types of speakers. And this is why when, like, a bullet drops in the screen, you hear it right behind you. Things like that. So that's what you're right, paying attention not just to, like, the film score and to the soundtrack, but also to all the sounds and how it is designed, and how the design essentially contributes to the meaning intended by the director. How does the director wants you to engage with a character, with a scene at a particular point in time in his or her film?
I was recently, a few months ago, working on a short film, and as a director, I had to tell my composer what type of music I want to imbue in, and I really blanked out. The thing that I really told him was I was going for Resurrection by Bigan, a feel of that movie, and how it has like a Chinese feel to the instruments, but also very surrealist, because our indie short film was a surrealist film about dreams. And I think my composer couldn't really understand that, and in the end it became like a trial and error thing. So I wanted to ask, how can a film director communicate better with a composer?
Well, definitely the first is the most practical, guide tracks. So you definitely need to prepare a playlist. So as you're becoming a fan of music, you should probably start compiling your own playlist on whatever streaming platform you're using. And you can be creative about it. Maybe you can set your playlist to moods. Maybe you can set your playlist to styles like gothic or dark or ethnic, happy, sad. And what's amazing about music is that it is quite subjective and culturally specific as to what music evokes specific emotions, but there is a kind of language that is derived from Western music that we've come to denote, right, as what is happy or sad. Now Hans Zimmer though started really breaking those boundaries by using more sound design approaches to crafting his music and using non-Western instruments and sounds as well. So having just listening to Hans Zimmer is great as well to get a sense.
Talking about Hans Zimmer, I saw his performance on YouTube, whatever, somewhere in the Middle East. Some of his more recent stuff, right? And very filmic, of course. But yes, as you said, departing from a lot of Western traditions. And yes, that's quite a move here. Can you think of? I think you may have mentioned some of them, but Malaysian composers who are doing that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, definitely the ones that I know personally. I'm sure there are more out there, but the ones that I know personally are Rendra Zawawi. And he has a lot of experience. Like, he has worked in LA. He has actually scored for the Mr. Robot series, aside from doing other projects as well. And there are a lot of aspiring film soundtrack composers as well, like Santosh Logendran and Ashwin Gobinath, who works for Nadir Studios. But they have a lot of work. Like Ashwin does have work on BMW shorties, like if you want to check out his stuff. So they're doing more stuff with the shorts and things like that. And I'm very sure there are more that I've not mentioned. I apologize to those listening, but they're out there. And like Azmail, who's also a close friend of mine, would probably also tell you, go out there and watch some music, watch some live music or listen to some local acts. Maybe chances are the people making music live or producing content are also film composers, because that's how music majors need to survive. And also Jet, please, there is also a music program running concurrently to the digital film program.
Well, I mean, this is the School of Film and Performing Arts at Sunway University. So we do have students, who are in the music programs and also in the music technology program. And they basically specialize in things like, mixing
Yes.
You know, and designing. And you may have noticed sometimes that when we have, like, they have showcases every year, and they have to set up, like, you know, performances by students, performed by students who are in the music program, and then mixed and engineered by students from the CMAT, which is music and technology or something like that.
Yeah.
And then at some point it's going to be filmed by students from film or something like that. But to talk about, you mentioned just now, short films. Yes, that is one of the most sort of vibrancy in terms of experimentation. Because if, let's say, you are, like, you know, aspiring or growing, you know, composer, and you want to be given a chance, well, that's where the chance comes from, you know. And you're dealing with similarly pretty people, directors, screenwriters, who don't have a lot of budget, but they're willing to be, and that's the best part of it. I always teach students, like, look, no budget, low budget films, that's the best way to learn and to be creative, because you're forced to find solutions to problems that you can't afford.
This I can relate to a lot.
That is how a lot of filmmakers and also composers and all that, how am I going to do this? I don't have this and that. Oh, maybe if I do this and that, experiment this and that. As a musician, you would know, as a composer, you have done the same thing. You find cheap or, like, zero cost solutions to resolve problems and deliver what the director wants. You know, what is required for storytelling at some point. So I would, like, you're right, you know, just go and watch live things. Go and interact and meet musicians, and next time you can get them to come and compose, and we say, hey, yeah, why not? You know, I'm looking for you to experiment with this and that, and then, you know, you create something. You got something. A lot of great composition, music work in film comes from that, especially from shorts, right? And then from there things grow, and then people become famous. The next thing you know, they won a Grammy, they won an Oscar, they won best, you know, award at whatever Malaysian film festival or something. That's how it starts. Start, you know, with these kind of ideas. No budget, low budget. Creative solutions.
What are you working on right now, actually, if you don't mind sharing, of course? And where can people follow or learn about your work?
Nice, thank you. I'll talk about the academic work, then I'll end with the creative work. So definitely I'm interested in expanding my research more on Yasmin Ahmad, so thank you for this wonderful opportunity, because it's allowed us to delve a lot deeper. Your names will definitely be in the next publication, because a lot of the ideas are being developed here.
I can also be co-author, but that's another story.
Hey, yeah, we can talk about that down the line,
sure.
absolutely. And a lot of my work is on Malaysian popular music. So that question that you had about what is Malaysian music, I'm trying to figure that out theoretically and also historically. But in the context of maritime Southeast Asia or the Nusantara.
Yes, that's a term I know you have used before. You have co-authored the book.
Exactly.
Crossing the Nusantara. Was it?
It's just called Made in Nusantara.
Made in Nusantara, which comprises this whole sort of channel of Southeast Asia connected by the sea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to theorize how we can think about musical identity in maritime Southeast Asia as a confluence. The same way that KL is Kuala Lumpur means muddy confluence. So it's theoretical, but I need to get some facts and evidence of, is this actually true? So I'm testing out these ideas and looking at the history of that. So that's the academic stuff. Yeah.
Just again,
Sure.
What kind of field work would that involve to look for the facts in this case?
A lot of it is media based. So I actually do, a lot of my work is based on listening to available media and songs.
Okay.
So listening to recordings, listening to also maybe even going to archives of music. I do a lot of media studies in that. Actually currently I'm working on research on Sheila Majid, one of Malaysia's most popular. She's known as Malaysia's queen of jazz, but Gen Z would hear her as the queen of city pop, Malaysian city pop. And I'm looking at the impact that she had in Japan in the 90s. So my work is actually a bit historical, but I look at sources like newspaper articles and reportage on her and try to construct a narrative. And of course, I actually just listen to her albums and analyze the music in the albums the same way that you critique or analyze a film. In terms of ethnography, then of course it'd be great to get an interview with her, but I also do have a network of musicians and music directors that have worked with her. So to that extent, my field work, so to say, is attempting to connect with people who make music, the producers, and hopefully the artists as well. But a lot of the information or data per se comes from the actual work, the works themselves, and the historical documentation of their journeys as musicians. On the musical side, I'm in 2 projects. So I have a project called Nadir. We call ourselves a cultural fusion group, but really we're a rock band with a Malaysian sound. And we will actually be performing soon in Jatim.
Jatim?
Yeah, on the 20th. Please come, both of you. I'll send you the details on the 25th of July.
25th of July.
Yeah, but I'll let you guys know. So we love performing at Jatim. We are, of course, working on some singles that will be coming out soon as well.
Where can people follow you?
So you can follow us alias Nadir Music Official.
Nadir.
NADIR Official. You can follow us on IG. You can search for Nadir on Spotify and the streaming platforms. So that's a long-standing project that I've worked with for many years. And coincidentally, the composer for the Mat Kilau track used to be in our band, Santosh Logendran. But he's now, actually I highly recommend listening to Santosh Logendran's solo music as well. And then the personal project that I have is a group called the Adil Johan Quintet, where I play the saxophone and I sing. And I have my own original music.
Which genre in particular?
Exactly, yeah, in the style of hip-hop, R&B, soul, and funk. But I really like Tom Misch and John Mayer, so some people call it indie soul as well.
Okay.
But it's whether you like it or you're not. We try to make sure everybody has a good time when we play. So you can just look up the Adil Johan Quartet, which is online. But if you want to find out what I'm doing on social media, just look for me, alias Adil J, ADILJ. Alias Adil J, and there will be some releases coming soon as well from Adil Johan Quintet, also known as AJQ. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for that, Dr. Adil Johan, for visiting us at Sun4U Radio at Sunway University. And we wish you the best in your future endeavors as a musician, as a scholar.
Thank you so much.
Some great projects coming up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rama.
This has been Sun4U Radio. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.